All right, I'll call the meeting to order, and this is Council's first meeting in person and in Council chambers since the COVID social isolation initiative was practiced. We do recognize we meet on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE Nation. With respect to the agenda, we don't have any changes other than the late item for the nomination, and so it'll be item J2, and somebody still wants to be part of UBCM, so we'll deal with that at that time. And I believe that's it, so if we can have an approval of the agenda, motion to approve. Councillor Goulet, Councillor Paul, anyone opposed? I guess I can go back to all in favor now. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay. And I do want to note for council and for folks in the gallery, this will be our first time webcasting as well. So the cameras are on and we'll get a chance to see what that looks like and how it's picking up our mics. So please be aware that you are speaking into your mics because the sound system has been brought into question. So make sure your mics are in front of you and they're live when you're speaking. So we'll adopt the special electronic council meeting minutes of June 23rd. Motion to adopt. Councillor Roodenburg, Councillor Elliott, second. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Councillor Paul.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm opposed based on report number 70-20 on page 6 of 106. Because in my opinion, I made no misrepresentations, and therefore I wish my vote duly recorded.
Councillor Paul, you can just note that, I mean, again, the minutes are the minutes. We've had this discussion with you before the report was tabled. The minutes reflect the report was tabled. So your nay vote is registered.
I'm sorry, is my negative vote not accepted?
I just said your nay vote is registered.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a delegation that has come at our behest, the BC Ambulance Service, Tanya Rich representing that, and Tanya can come up, and then Jason Jackson with the Ambulance Paramedics of BC, QPH 73.
Excuse me, Mayor, did you want City Manager to give an overview of the COVID-19 safety precautions and the webcasting, or would you like to do that later? You had previously said that
we had previously said that we would do that. Let's do that as part of the normal business once we move into our normal business. Okay, thanks for the reminder. Go ahead, please have a seat. So for you want to make sure that just as my mic is, if you push the button, you'll see the red dial go on. And I believe, Tanya, you're going to kick us off, and then Jason will present as well. And council members, you have your the presentation in front of you. We're not going to be doing it onto the board. Is that correct?
No, it's actually going to be presented on
Okay,
on
you're going to do it?
well.
Gina's going to do it. Okay, so go ahead, please, Tanya.
Well, thank you for the invitation to come and share this with you. So today, I just want to share a little bit about some of the changes that we've had within our service. So I'm talking about the Quesnel Kilo Guarantee. On the second slide, you can actually see what our current staffing levels are and what they've been over the past few years. So we have 4 full-time staff and 18 part-time staff, 19 currently. Our current, onto the next slide. Our current staffing model here in Quesnel is we have 2 cars that we staff. The first car is what's called an Alpha Fox car. Well, one of the members is a full-time member. They work 2 days and 2 night shifts. They work 12 hours a day, and they get paid for the full 12-hour shifts. And they're paired with what's called a Fox member, which they're required to be at the station, and they get paid a standby rate for the time that they're at the station. And then when they're activated for a call, they get a 3-hour call out at their full rate of pay for each call. Or if the call, obviously, they get paid for any work that they do. The second car is what's called a kilo car, and it's manned by 2 part-time paramedics that carry a pager, and then they respond to the station. So currently, or previous to June 1st, we had a kilo guarantee. So they were being paid $2 an hour to carry their pager regularly, and then if they made it to the end of their shift and didn't receive a call out for that shift, then they were given a 4-hour call guaranteed pay for 4 hours of regular pay. And on to the next slide. In 2017, that was implemented, the Kilo Guarantee, as a temporary measure to better secure staffing levels in rural remote communities in BC. And again, the model guaranteed staff 4 hours of regular pay on top of the 2 hours of pager pay. And the next slide. Response volume data. So this actually shows you over the past 3 fiscal years what the call volume was. So in the first one is the total calls that were for this community. So you can see 3,469 in 2017-2018. 2018-2019 saw 3,227, and 2019-2020 3,679. And you can see the breakdown there of which unit actually received the call and completed the call.
For me, please, because you've got Alpha Juliet at the top of this, and prior to
Oh.
that, it was Alpha Fox.
Yeah, sorry, that's a
That's just,
mistake.
so it
That
would
just
be the
means
Alpha
it's
Fox.
Alpha Fox,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Okay, and on to the next one. So 2 items from the recent ratified collective agreement will affect the staffing level, the staffing in Quesnel here. So the Kilo Guarantee is now been phased out, and it's reverting back to the $2 an hour pager pay. So they get $2 an hour for their entire shift, whether or not they get a call. And then the Fox that is paired with the Alpha is actually, with the most recent agreement, actually has to be transitioned into something else. We're removing the Fox. So it'll either have to go to a full-time, regular part-time, or on-call Kilo. All right, and on to the next one. Okay, thanks. And so as of April 1st, 2020, 39 stations across BC were slated to have the Kilo Guarantees ceased, and that included Quesnel. The decision was based on a workload formula that included staffing levels and call volume across the province. The phase-out was delayed because of, obviously, the recent COVID pandemic response, and it was delayed to June 1st. And the province-wide phase-out is slated for late of 2021 for the Kilo across the province. The Fox conversion. By March 2022, Fox shifts will be eliminated province-wide, replaced by full-time, regular part-time, scheduled on-call, and/or call-out. And then I will open it up to your questions.
Councillor Paul, and if we could just stick to the questions with this presentation, and we'll have Jason respond, then we can kind of get into what it means for Quesnel. Councillor Paul.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's noted in under the Kilo Guarantee page that in 2017, BC Emergency Health Services, is that what the acronym is for?
Yes.
BCEHS,
Yep.
implemented the Kilo Guarantee as a temporary measure to better secure staffing levels. Did
Yes.
that work?
Initially, it seemed to solve some of the staffing challenges, and as time progressed, it hasn't secured staffing. That hasn't been a result.
Other questions or comments? Tanya, just a couple of questions. So I guess the conversion to full-time, regular, part-time, or Kilo on call, is that at the discretion of the individual who's holding that position? They have a choice? Is there a timeline associated for them at an individual level?
Sorry,
So the Fox will be transitioned, so that position, right?
Yep.
Will be transitioned to a full-time?
Yep.
Or regular part-time, or the Kilo or
Yeah,
on-call,
so-
right?
Yeah, so that's going to be based on we have committees that are looking at the volumes and which is the best solution for this area.
Right.
And so at that point, whatever the decision happens to be, if it happens to be full-time, then those positions will be posted, and then people would apply or bid on those.
So, because the reason this is in front of us is for us to understand the staffing and the implications for our detachment here, and of course, we have the Wells situation as well. But is the possibility then that we would see more full-time positions made available out of the Quesnel ambulance here through this process?
The Fox either has to be converted to a full-time
Right.
or a regular part-time or converted back to kilo. You know, it's based on the call volume. There is the potential for there to be more full-time. I
More
can't
full-time.
speak on what the decision's going to be coming out of that, but there
Okay.
is the potential.
Yeah, so that's what I was getting at. The other piece with respect to the kilo and the on-call members, and if you take a look at, you know, the table of how many part-time people we've got here, who pays for them to go through their training process to be certified to be able to be on-call?
That's actually varies a lot, depending on the situation. We have in some areas, there's some support that's that is provided by, you know, in areas that are difficult staffing. In this area here, it would be something that normally we would bring in a PCP qualified paramedic that's
Right.
already has their training, and they've gone through the training and paid for that themselves.
Okay. So the individuals will be
Yes.
paying?
Yeah.
There
Yeah,
may
no-
be some facilitation of getting the training available close to home?
Provincially, we do a lot of things to try, and obviously staffing is a huge issue for us. And in different areas, we have different things that we can, different allowances and things like that we can
Okay.
do, so, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Runge.
Sorry. It hasn't been used for so long, I didn't know I had to turn it up. Anyway, my question actually is with regards to, I guess, the kilo part-timers. How often would it be that they would not be called out on a shift?
Okay, so if you look at the numbers, right, that's based on, there's 2 shifts a day. So previously, they would, if 365 days a year, we'll times that by 2. So you can tell that the kilo numbers are larger than that. So it's likely that they were getting a call anyways. So, and that's, part of the reason why certain communities were chosen, is that it wasn't being activated as often in regards to that.
All right. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason Jackson. I currently am the unit chief in Quesnel. I'm off on assignment with our union. I hold the title of provincial vice president. I was also part of the bargaining team that bargained the last round of the collective bargaining in 2019. Today I'm speaking to you solely as the union representative, not the employer representative. I understand that there was some concern raised about the kilo guarantee. And in 2017, I was the one on the union side that actually wrote that agreement. It originally started in the north, and the intent was basically to draw out the current members we have. And in the slides you just saw, there's 19 part-time staff attached to Quesnel. Quite often they would go find other jobs, or they weren't available because they, as a part-time member, or on-call, you make yourself available to work. So you elect when you want to work. So at $2 an hour, there was a significant challenge to staff our cars, especially in the north. Shortly after, in early 2018, it became a provincial call-out guarantee. So from that perspective, we did see an improvement in staffing provincially, and then slowly those numbers dwindled off. And part of it is the staffing changes. We've seen a lot of new full-time units in Vancouver come in. So, and every time there's a large metropolitan change in staffing for the ambulance service, it draws out staff from rural, remote, and urban areas. So it originally had its positive effects. especially in some of the remote communities where they could now make a living. Instead of doing a call, once every week, now they're earning 8 hours of pay every day, right? So in some communities, it was very, very beneficial. In a community like Quesnel, it's not as noticeable. In the bargaining round, what was identified was 39 stations that were designated as urban, that had a kilo unit or 2 kilo units, depending on the size of the communities. And approximately 12% of the time was the statistical number put forward that the unit wouldn't turn for a call. So 12% of the shifts. Unfortunately, we went into bargaining, we started the implementation of the new collective agreement, and there's a number of improvement provisions, but then there's some restrictions as well. The modeling that was put forward for scheduled on-call was focused on remote and rural areas, where it's providing a staffed model where they're guaranteed to be paid 8 hours a day, but then they cover pager for the rest of the time. So it's actually providing, a structured job with guaranteed pay. So no more just $2 an hour, then depending on when you get your call. For the 39 stations that were identified in the bigger stations, the intent was to remove the kilo guarantee simply because the belief was that it was utilized so few hours that they would basically go back to the previous pay levels. And I can tell you, as the unit chief of Quesnel, and focusing on staffing, and most of the other 39 stations are similar, you can staff your station based on statistical numbers, so your staff are going to earn a potential of like $1,500 to $1,800 biweekly without a kilo guarantee. When the kilo guarantee went in, that kind of bolstered some of their earning income, but then we also saw some reduction in staffing numbers, just because more people came kind of out of the woodwork. So we're gonna step back to that model in those 39 stations. But on the other side, there's also new resources. So as Tanya mentioned, the Fox cars being eliminated. Most likely that will lead to 4 more full-time positions in Quesnel, simply because the language of the collective agreement states that where all possible, the employer will utilize full-time over regular part-time. And because of the alpha pattern structure, that's kind of the next progression, unless something significant changes. So by March of 2022, we're going to see that alpha car become a fully staffed full-time unit. But there's no changes for the kilo unit right now. And as SOC rolls out, there's going to be a large change provincially of staffing all over the province. And that's something that's just kind of in its infancy right now. We've struck a committee, they've done evaluations for fatigue assessment and different station evaluations for where it's safe to utilize it and where it's not. So that part is rolling out, but it's going to take a period of time. Unfortunately, with all this transition in this new contract, there's probably more changes in this contract than we've seen in the 40-year history of the ambulance service. Like it's not small by any means. And when we started this rollout back in March, when the kilo guarantee was to terminate, COVID hit. When COVID struck, it also reduced our call volumes. So that the kilo unit here, predominantly probably 50% of it approximately is transfers. So from Quesnel up to Prince George or vice versa, or down to Williams Lake. When COVID hit, all of the daily surgeries and all of the elective surgeries were all canceled, which is a huge percentage of our call volume for that unit. So subsequent to that, obviously their earning potential went down. And then we recognize with the kilo guarantee, it's kind of like a double whammy, right? We're cutting your call volume significantly, and we're taking that guarantee away. Typically, the unit here probably, I'd say they close to average 2 calls a shift, with the exception of night shifts. But by taking all the calls away, right, it's a significant financial impact. So there was discussions between the union and PHSA and government to maintain and extend that, which we were successful to up till June. And then from that point, the government was no longer willing to extend that funding. So and part of the reason behind that is because we were returning to kind of normal operations within the healthcare system. The transfers were starting to go back up, which means all of their earning potentials in theory would go up as well. So there's a lot of variables to the impact of the Kilo members. I can tell you as a unit chief and currently my acting unit chief in this station, who's Kevin is currently runs the station in a similar principle that I do to commit. So it's not a solid staffing model with pager pay, but we can focus in on the numbers and really get close to a steady paycheck. That's one of the benefits of being the urban post with the call volume of the station. Obviously, the downside is without steady staff, it fluctuates, right? And we don't want to see the community put at risk. If the car goes out of service, that's significant. Part of the challenge that we're having right now is staffing on a much broader perspective provincially. Over the last probably 4 years now, there's been varying staffing evaluations through different communities. Like if you look at Williams Lake, they did an evaluation there and they added 4 more positions. So they have an exact same model that Quesnel does, except their Kilo day car was now transferred to a Bravo car, which is 4 more full-timers on a day shift. And when you look at the call volumes of our community in Quesnel versus Williams Lake, they're almost identical. But then there's a lot of external factors. Some of the smaller communities like Wells is struggling to staff their ambulance. Lexus Creek, a lot of the smaller communities are struggling. So the Kilo Guarantee originally was to help with that. And it's, subsequently now there's so much change and there's so many positions, the positions just aren't getting filled. So we're really in a large position of flux with the ambulance service right now. We're implementing new full-time positions. There's new shift patterns for full-time, which is going to drive up the number of full-time positions provincially in many posts. But overall, we should see some very positive change, hopefully, with the staffing levels in Quesnel to move to full-time positions. But it still leaves the Kilo unit. I can tell you that there's no other changes to the Kilo model of staffing in those 39 stations. However, there was recently an introduction by government that there's 55 new units coming. This has also kind of hindered the implementation of the contract and the new language of the contract, because although it was announced by government, they didn't tell us where they're going or what the communities are going to be in or what the staffing model is. So because of the amount of full-time positions and then the scheduled on-call positions being introduced and then this new announcement, there's a lot of change and it has to be planned out very diligently. Otherwise, we're going to have people moving all over the province, basically. And it's hard to keep control of that kind of change. So right now, we are in discussions with the employer. We meet probably bi-weekly currently to implement these new models. But it's going to take a period of time to organize that. And obviously, we're still waiting for funding information and the other information on the 55 new units. The units that were introduced are focused on remote, rural, and Indigenous communities. So in the north, that's fairly significant for us. So it also kind of hinders the development of SOC. SOC is the scheduled on-call model where it's 8 hours a day, but some of these communities might see full-time positions as well. So how to transition that all through, it takes a significant amount of planning. So on a go-forward basis, it's going to take a bit of time, I think, to put plans in place, get even the physical ambulances and things like that, the logistics have to be worked out as well, and the station staffing and so forth. I know, Bob, you raised training. Currently training for PCP, Quesnel's an urban post, so our minimum qualification is primary care paramedic. There are grants that you can apply currently through the JI, and that funding looks like it's possibly going to end in 2023. There's funding through, I think it's the adult education and some other ministries where they've been adding funds in to help acquire the licensing levels. And it's beneficial for people in our community. If they attend the class, they can get up to $5,000 to help support them in that education. The downside, obviously, is being that minimum qualification if there's no PCP available, it takes longer to acquire one. It's a bit longer of a process. But there is some, some supports there to boost that licensing level. That's all I can think of right now regarding.
No, that was helpful, Jason. Questions from council? So I guess the big reason that we asked you to come in is that there was a query made on the announcement about what does this mean for Quesnel, for public safety in Quesnel, for recruitment and retention. I think, Jason, you commented, with respect to the public safety issue, but we're in the middle of an opioid crisis. We work with our own RCMP as to how many RCMP have to respond when we have an OD, and then, of course, ambulance response there, and that can take an ambulance crew a lot of time, a paramedic crew a lot of time engaged in something like that. We've had 2 wildfire seasons. Looks like this will be a flooded out season, fingers crossed, but the wildfire season doesn't actually start until August, so who knows. And again, in 2017 in particular, we had a lot of back and forth between here and Williams Lake and moving people around and so on. And with respect to our own visitor and tourism attraction and resident attraction strategy, lots of people want to know that the healthcare system is robust. So I guess for council's edification in terms of us engaging with the province around this, and I know part of the kilo issue and the $2 issue went through the Union of BC Municipalities at one point and came back to the province, is Quesnel, and I take the point that we may end up with more full-time people, but with these changes, is Quesnel at risk of not being able to have an ambulance station and paramedics that we need to do what needs to be done? Or is it too early to tell at this point? I'd like to hear that from both of you. So go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, no, I don't think that there isn't any risk of Quesnel not having resources here. That's another one of the things that I wanted to mention through all of this is that there's actually been some changes in the way we dispatch as well. We've now changed, and again, with the kilo, we want to make sure that they have work. So it has actually been so that we're actually sending our kilo unit on any of these interfacility transfers. So it's keeping our 90-second response
Right.
unit in town
In town.
available for calls. And if needed, we do draw from other communities and we share services. So it's a provincial organization, right? We can pull from anywhere and
Right.
do that. So definitely
Okay.
it's. Yeah.
Thank you. And Jason?
From a numbers perspective and watching the staffing changes provincially, I would compare Quesnel to some stations that have recently changed their staffing model, such as 100 Mile, Williams Lake, Fort St. John, or Dawson Creek. All 4 of those stations had a similar staffing pattern to here originally, and they had introduced some new full-time staff into those communities on day shift patterns to look at the transfer volume, much like these 55 new positions that are undefined yet. And overall in those stations, while they added the full-time resources, it put a lot of strain on the kilo resources. Albeit we're utilizing kilo, and I think for Quesnel, we've always used kilo to transfer first, or to do transfers out to the airport where we're bringing in CCP crews or ITT crews for infants and critical patients. Statistically, I haven't run numbers in a number of years now, but going back about 4 or 5 years, typically in the community, it's about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half. So when we did a review of the number of times the Alpha car, the primary response unit, was tied up longer than that on a call, about 75% of the time there was another call that came in. Maybe it's routine or maybe it was a transfer. I don't have those kind of numbers, but it was fairly significant. So being a provincial service, we move units based on the opportunity of a call coming in, basically. So if we know that, the Alpha car's heading out to NASCO and Kilo's, off on a transfer, they'll move a unit from Williams Lake or Wells. The risk that I would say is for Quesnel currently is that Williams Lake has staffing issues, and Wells is currently unstaffed. They have a single member, and they're working on improving that, even with the kilo guarantee. So hopefully, the SOC model, when scheduled on-call, when it rolls out, it'll hopefully draw some people into the community there to staff that unit, because it's important for our community as well. It cross-covers us, right? So when our units get busy, you can't always have an ambulance available, right? Sometimes it's the roll of the dice. If 3 calls come in back-to-back within 10 minutes, we've only got 2 ambulances, which means somebody else is coming, or a call's being held, depending on the nature of the events. So that right now, with the staffing changes, I mean, there's always a risk, but it's no more prevalent right now with our staffing. However, staffing overall provincially is starting to struggle, right? In the communities that I mentioned, those 4 communities where we did see some changes, and the tough part is whenever you transition into full-time staffing from a precarious workforce or an on-call workforce, that always reduces the amount of work available. So it's hard to balance that. You create 4 full-time jobs, but then there might not be enough work at the nighttime or transfer work to make a sustainable living just working nights. So it's really going to depend on the 55 units, the rollout of SOC. Like, there's a lot of planning that needs to go into this, and on a go-forward basis. I'm, as the unit chief of this station, and obviously as an executive member of the union, I watch my community very closely, and I raise our community every opportunity I get at the bargaining table and with government. So quite often, Quesnel is a key discussion point. And I take pride in the staffing that we have here and the local members. So it's a priority for me, and it's a priority for the acting unit chief, as well as, I believe, for Tanya, and we've carried on those staffing model. We haven't changed that. But eventually, on a go-forward basis, there might be some struggles from what I see coming with the overall staffing changes.
So I guess, any other questions or comments from council? So I guess this is one of the ones that we'll just have to watch and see how things go. I think your point, Jason, it's interesting that, it may be a celebration, we get more full-time positions here, but it may also compromise how many people you've got availability on call. That balance has to be right at some point, right? So, but I think for council, I think we understand that it's a complex issue. It's not as simple as the query that came in about switching back to $2 an hour. Is it going to screw your community? It's not a simple answer. We're going to have to watch it and pay attention to it. So, okay.
Yeah, I think in an advocacy for the community, I think, more full-time positions, a full alpha car here is warranted. This is just my personal perspective and my experiences. I absolutely think a full alpha car should be in place here, and possibly, a paid day car as well. But it's a challenge, right? We've seen centralized healthcare, the ambulance service when staffing difficulties happen, it kind of becomes a centralized system as well, because all of the remote communities may be having staffing challenges. So the whole system has been designed to be a provincial model to shuffle resources where it's needed. But I think, as an advocacy point, I absolutely think, we should be petitioning government for a full-time unit here.
Okay.
And it's naturally going to transition by 2022.
Right.
At least I'll be pushing that from my end and using my contract leverage against the government. But, even for transfer units and the other new 55 positions, I'd be curious too for the North Cariboo and the other smaller communities, and the other mayors and stuff to work towards, trying to acquire some of those resources. So.
Great, thank you. We're just in the process of scheduling our Union of BC municipality meetings with ministers, and so the timing is good for us to be briefed and to add that to the mix in the conversation that we'll have with the health minister. So thank you both, and hopefully you're staying overnight and driving back, or Tanya came in from McBride, so thank you very much. And Jason, Quesnel's still your home base, but are you flying back and forth, or are you zooming like the rest of us these days?
I was flying until Central Mountain Air cut their flights.
Yeah.
I zoom as much as possible. All of the different systems for WebEx, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's a challenge even,
Yeah,
so.
good. Well, thank you both very much. Gina's got you both trained very well. And it's a good segue into, or segue. Segway's the thing, though. Segway's the moving in, isn't it? Or the other way around? Okay, City Manager, maybe if you could just do that overview of COVID and of the webcasting before we move into the rest of our agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this little report is actually just about verbatim from the email that Gina sent out last week about what the changes that we're making here. Obviously, first one is reduced seating capacity for council chambers. So the actual seating capacity, and you'll see it posted at the door, is for this part of, for the horseshoe is 7 people. So that's why we're spaced out as we are there. And then for this part from the barricade on back, the seating capacity is 20 people. So if you look at it tonight, for an example, where between staff and media is 8 people. And then if you have a couple of members coming to do a delegation, puts you up to 10 people. So that would leave 10, potentially up to 10 extra people for anyone interested in coming and seeing the proceedings. So challenging numbers to work with. It's a pretty small amount. And because that's the actual rated room capacity, even if a family group comes in and there's 5 people or 6 people sitting together, that counts as 6 people against that number. We can't go over that, what that number is, because it was set with WorkSafe BC in mind, their guidelines, and also set by our fire inspector. So staff will be seated, we're trying to space ourselves out as well, seating 6 feet apart. Staff will be down on this side and come up here to speak, and obviously we'll be doing some cleansing of the speakers and such after. Let's see. Anyone who wants to present to council, so that's for delegations obviously, but also for staff, will come up to here, because as part of our webcasting, they need to be speaking into the microphone or it doesn't get picked up very well. And one thing worth mentioning, masks are not mandatory. Anyone entering into these chambers is welcome to bring a mask with them, but they're certainly not mandatory. And that is the point behind the spacing that we're doing, is to try to have a large enough space that the masks are not required. And finally, there's hand sanitizing stations all over the place here. We have them here, we have them when you first come into council chambers, and there's lots of hand sanitization opportunities. So that's about it for this. Where this is going to get challenging for us is over the year, this next year, as we move into bigger public hearings, because then we will have to either go into a different venue altogether, which is something that we experimented with a little bit down at the leisure patch down in the arenas for a large meeting that we had about community forest. Or if we're going to use this venue, we'll have to get creative on how we use the lobby at the very back, and to have people so that they're spaced there, maybe even on the stairs, so that have some spacing there, and then allow them to come and speak if it's, and as you know, sometimes the issues, you do get a lot of people wanting to speak, so it should, that part we still will have to develop how we're going to work that. And in addition, if we do get to the point where we have more of a full chamber from the perspective of the audience, at some point we will probably actually be closing the door and saying, or doing some stuff, putting a sign out there saying, it's an open meeting, but it's full. Sorry, right? So, or we'll have to figure some of this out as we go, is my only point. But I think what we have is going to meet the goal as far as distancing and hopefully overall keep everyone safe. Thank you.
And just quickly on the webcasting, I think. Ms. Albers?
Thank you, Mayor. So webcasting is being recorded live, but then the recording is going to be uploaded to the website the following day, because we have to timestamp each agenda item to correspond to the video recording, so that if someone wants to find a particular item on the agenda, they're not having to watch a 2-hour-long video. and the recording will be uploaded to the Agenda Minutes website, webpage on the city's website.
Thank you. And as council is aware, we're starting to, just on our social media, give notice that when the agenda is published, and I think we may end up doing something similar when the video is available too. We've talked about that as well. Just get something on social media and put a direct link to the video too, and that way people have access to that. Any questions or comments on the COVID or the webcasting? Okay, just on the public hearings, the CRD has had some experience, and I'm sure that CAO McLean could give you some feedback. They have had a couple of public hearings. They did have one where a large group of individuals showed up. What they ended up having to do is exactly as you described. They held those individuals outside to maintain social distancing. The one lesson they learned was that where they were holding people, they would like to have the speakers so that individuals could hear still the other speakers. So that's all they were worried about. They weren't necessarily worried about being in the physical room. They wanted to hear what other people were saying as opposed to just being able to come in and only hear themselves speak. Ms. Albers?
Thank you, Mayor. So we actually have a speaker out in the lobby that we can turn up. It has a volume switch there, so we can make it quite loud. So people, should their overflow go out beyond the lobby and down the stairs, they would be able to hear as long as the door was open.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, I'm sure we'll sort this out as we continue to, what is it, be kind, be gentle, and be safe, whatever it is that Dr. Bonnie Henry keeps reminding us about. So moving on to committee reports. In this case, the next three reports, unfortunately for everybody, are all from me. The board highlights, just a couple of things of note on the CRD board highlights, again for information only. There was a NDI application advanced for the Cariboo Ski Touring Club. That club continues to do amazing work out at Hallis Lake, and this is for funding for lodge improvements. And I know that the Gold Rush Cycling Club and others are talking about articulating that facility with our summer use as well, with the trails and so on, especially if we connect Dragon Mountain and the Wonderland Trail System together, then a natural marshalling point may actually be that lodge and extend its utilization through the summer months. So that dialogue is going on. The other note on the second column, the CRD did endorse the regional airports letter that we asked them to, so they're sending their own letter off. The North Cariboo Recreation Parks and Fee Charges were received and endorsed by the board as per our last joint planning meeting. And then at the bottom, you'll note that the request by the Ministry of Forest, Land, Natural Resource Operations, Rural Development for a financial contribution towards the CRD was only received by the board, and a letter sent to the ministry saying that this is Ministry of Environment and they're the ones that ought to fund it, not local taxpayers. So, any questions or comments on the CRD report? Seeing none, we'll move on then to the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee report. This is most likely the last meeting of this iteration of the committee. I'll be chatting with council members over the course of the summer with respect to new committee appointments, because we're reaching our 2-year mark and we switched the standing committees up. So we did have a look at the 2021 budget pressures and the framework that we've got beyond 2021. The big piece in there, of course, Baker Creek, while staff continue to work with the provincial and federal governments on funding, it will be some form of a hit to our budgets. On the sewer side, which is the biggest potential hit for us on our contribution towards that, the lion's share will be picked up by the disaster financial assistance, but we do have to come up with our share. Of course, we have our sewer reserve and our sewer surplus to be able to pick that up. The other is the riprap and how far the riprap is going to have to go and how much of the protecting and guarding of Baker Creek within the city will actually be picked up as part of the emergency and what will be deemed the emergency is over, and it's work that we just need to do in advance of the next potential flood still remains to be seen. So it's a vulnerability for us. We continue to have the vulnerabilities around the loss of airport revenue and the loss of the casino funding, and with our city snow budget already at 80%, we should expect that we'll be going into some kind of financial deficit in 2021, even with the fact that we held the line on our budget that we approved pre-COVID. Staff will continue to do everything that they can to hold the line on all discretionary spending, and wherever we can stand some things down because of COVID, they are doing that. The other item, and it's a recommendation from council, is that under the current state of emergency, the Ministerial Order 157, we can extend the redemption period for tax sold properties. So that's the 2019 tax sold properties, and then the future tax ones as well into 2020. It was recommended to council by the FSAC committee that we just simply stay with the dates that we've got. We don't want to add confusion for individuals who have bid on properties and want to purchase the properties to give another extension for another year, especially since many of these properties we would deem as nuisance properties and properties that we want to see dealt with in a timely manner. So I would invite a motion as per the recommendation from FSAC on this to give staff direction just to continue with the pre-COVID timeline and continue with tax sale timelines as we were intending to do. Can I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Runge, so moved. Seconded, Councillor Elliott. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. So that's my Finance Committee report, and then the final one from me tonight is the Quesnel Community Forest Agreement update. You've been provided with both the report from that and then a draft press release that we're trying to get out the door to keep the community apprised. As council may be recall, a nominal allocation of about 77,000 cubic meters has been assigned to a community forest in the last apportionment decision by the minister. It's part of almost 300,000, 280 odd thousand cubic meters that were apportioned for First Nations and for community. The letter that was sent out inviting interested parties to get together to discuss the community forest allocation went to the City of Quesnel, the Cariboo Regional District, the City of Wells, or the District of Wells, the 4 First Nations, Estala, Luskus, Kluskus, the LHTAKO, DENE, and NASCO, and to the CRD. We did some work in the background to have wells pulled out of that. They have a pre-existing community forest, and so the Ministry of Forest just simply added a nominal allocation from the community forest allocation to top up theirs. 70,000 cubic meters. We did question that volume because as a very small community, that puts that community around 12,000 cubic meters in their community forest. And so we really asked, you know, whether that's 7,000, because it's a community of about 250, and if you look at our community of 26,000, you pare this down to 68 or whatever thousand cubic meters, of which 20 odd is deciduous. So we did have a bit of a question with Flynnwood, and I know they're going to be continuing to work on the numbers. At the meeting, we had the 4 First Nations, the city and CRD representatives there. It was a mix of political representation and technical representation. Flynnwood had the largest share of representatives there, and then next was the city, and then the CRD, and then the various First Nations. There was a request from Flynnwood that key decision makers be there, and there was an affirmation by everybody that the decision makers who were necessary for the first step were in the room, whether they were technical or whether they were elected. So coming out of the meeting as a first meeting, and as the city manager indicated, we were in the Little Patch skating rink in Arena 2. It worked. It's even there, it's kind of stunted because, as all of you know, if you've attended conferences or workshops or whatever, most of the real work gets done on the breaks with people standing and chatting and everything else. And of course, everything's social distancing and rotating through getting your break materials and so on. So it was a bit stinted, but still a lot of the real work was still done on the breaks and then brought back to the main group. The key kind of preliminary decisions made coming out of this, Cluscus or Luscus will be working with Flynn Road to see whether or not they should remain in the Quesnel allocation or whether they want to look for something different. Cluscus is so far away that for them to participate in what everybody else wants to be more of an interface community force, so something that's actually contiguous with the municipal boundaries of the city of Quesnel. Their representative, again, a technical person who was on the phone with their administration and executive, was saying, you know, they're not sure that they necessarily want to participate in an interface, so they may end up similar to Wells, get a nominal allocation, or they may just bow out because they've got their First Nations woodland license allocation to deal with anyway. So that remains to be seen. The rest of the players there all indicated interest. All but one all indicated interest in a contiguous land base. So find that volume on a contiguous land base with the idea that it be an interface land base. The one was CR Director Massier indicated that he thought it could be a whole bunch of pockets all over the place. The city manager and I met with Director Massier after this and talked that through. And it's part of the problem with unincorporated communities that are settled areas don't have access to the kind of community wildfire protection planning, expertise, or financing that the larger communities do. So Director Massey is not wrong that this allocation could be used potentially to go in and protect those built-up communities. So you look at Barlow Creek, or Baker Creek out further around Sylvia's, where you've got development around Penchesaket Lake, all of that stuff. Well, we believe that there's other tools that we can be using to protect those, particularly if we can get this license settled, because then with the community forest license, with the staffing, with the order of magnitude, the scale that you've got of working that, you can then actually work with those communities to do a little bit of fuel management around them and protect them. So we believe that you've actually got the tool that you need to work on this. So the report you'll see indicates that the consensus position was clearly a contiguous land base. With respect to structure, we didn't want to get into structure discussions at this time in terms of the management, the structure, is it a limited company, is it a not-for-profit society, etc., until we deal a bit more around the aspirations. And I have to say that the aspirations, because that was the first thing that everybody was asked, there's not really any misalignment from either the First Nations or the CRD of the city on the aspirations. One of the areas we did briefly touch on was any money coming from this. And of course, Quesnel City Council has an existing resolution that any money coming from the community forest would be returned back in to the community forest and would be used for additive initiatives such as community marketing, building more amenities, etc., and not for base funding. And I think that gave folks comfort that we weren't going to be entering into this to get, as the former community forest initiative under the North Cariboo Economic Development Corp wanted to, I think it was $1 million they wanted to flow into the city for core infrastructure, to build roads, etc., and to offset property taxation. So that's not the intent of this, and I think for the other partners that gave comfort. But the aspirations and the financial benefits need to line up. And then the final piece, and we're advancing it, is that the allocation exists. And if you backdate it, there's actually wood that was allocated, or annual allowable cut, allocated to the community forest that it isn't being harvested. And in a time where the harvest is so low, we need to activate this license. So over the course of the summer, we're going to be working with the Ministry of Forests, LHTAKO, NASCO, to see about getting a non-replaceable forest license for a couple of years so that we can actually activate the volume that's available and get it into our mills. That will also be the potential funding for the community forest going forward. So it's a way for us to fund the community forest without the partners trying to find the money. And we had Susan Mulkey from the BC Community Forest Association up, and she said that starting a community forest up, especially one as complicated and as large volume as this and potentially large land base, could be south of $500,000 to get it up and running, fully realized, get all your forest stewardship plans in place, your legal corporation in place, and so on, and about a 2-year process. So the idea of getting a non-replaceable forest license activated, getting money flowing from the timber would then quite handily, depending on the nature of the volume, quite handily pay for the startup without any of the partners coming to bear. But again, we've already had the discussion as a council if some of the front-end costs, even to formalize that, would have to be borne. Everybody agreed an accounting system would be established right out of the gate, that anybody who put money in would be compensated once the money started to flow. So, okay. So the next step for this, our forestry group, so Aaron and Lacey, are in the process of coordinating with all of the named partners, working with Flynn Road to see where they're going to go with the Cluskis situation, and we're hoping for sometime early August to convene the main players again and to resolve the issue of initial structure and of the NERFL so that we can get this going as quickly as we can in the fall. The Flynn Road staff indicated they had enough at the meeting to warrant putting a brief in front of the minister to give the formal invitation to the parties that were in the room, which is the next step. Right now we just have an informal, are you interested? A formal invitation or a letter of intent will come from the minister to the named parties, and that kicks the process off in a more formal way. So after, I think I was corrected when I gave my talk at the opening, I think it was 1997, was the first offer of a community forest for the city of Quesnel, and I think there's been 3 subsequent offers, all of which have failed. This will be the first time that we potentially will get to the formal offer from the minister to the named parties. So it's taken us a while, but hopefully it'll be worth it. Questions or comments from council? Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the update. I mean, just your last comment there, the discussion's happening since '97. This is something that we've been wanting for a long time, and I'm really glad to see that all the players are working together to move this forward. I'm also glad that everybody seems to be working towards the original vision that we had as far as having that that community forest in and around the city of Quesnel and not, putting fingers out. But it's interesting and exciting to hear that down the road there is that possibility to help. I mean, one of the major things is fire mitigation, not just for our community, but for others as well. So if we can, create some funds, but also help with fire mitigation, it's huge. It was my understanding maybe back a long time ago, and I'm not sure, just as far as the CRD and funding that's available, is this something that NDIT has put out to other communities before? Has NDIT weighed in that, yeah, it's a distinct possibility that the CRD can be funded?
So we're not quite at that stage yet, but the Northern Development Trust's fund for research and development does include community forests. We haven't engaged them in the conversation around whether that would include the startup, because there's a presumption in the fund that it's for community forests that are doing, more research, more interesting harvesting, maybe bringing in some outside players to help, for example, doing commercial thinning for the first time, etc. So we haven't engaged them in that conversation because we're not quite there yet. To your point, though, with respect to kind of the fingers or helping other communities, one of the things that's a problem for us just now, even activating our own community wildfire protection plan, is that we're not a licensee of record. So the city of Quesnel is not associated with any entity that is a licensee. So we can't work with BC Timber Sales, for example. To work with BC Timber Sales to get a sale out, say, in the Barlow Creek area, to go after, and then we can do fuel management or fuel mitigation work and part of a commercial harvest. The minute you're a licensee, that becomes available to you to have those relationships. And lots of community forests have used that tool to be able to do work outside of their main land area. So that's what we were saying to Director Massey. Tools exist once you become a licensee of record to be able to go outside of the actual land designation you've got, and you'll have the staff, the resources, and the relationship to be able to go do that kind of work. So, and Hatzo Community Forest, I think, quadrupled there, so that's likely. They quadrupled their volume in the height of the mountain pine beetle epidemic. Because they were picking up salvage licenses all around their core. Same with West Fraser, for example, because they're a tree farm license holder. They actually didn't do a lot of harvesting in their tree farm license because they were picking up salvage licenses to go elsewhere. So that's the benefit of becoming a licensee, is it just opens up a whole other world for you. Okay? Any other questions or comments? Councillor Roodenburg.
Thank you. I know that I've lived through a couple of the iterations of what a community forest should look like for Quesnel. And I'm not sure if I've missed it here, but the structure of the partnership, we've got 6 local governments involved here. So what kind of a structure is the partnership?
So the model that our district manager, Josh Pressey, is using, that's advancing us down this path. This is a very complicated community forest. When you have 4 First Nations involved, whether it's 4 or 3, and you have 2 elected bodies, the regional district and the city of Quesnel. The First Nations are on 2-year election cycles. We're on 4-year election cycles. Susan Malky will be, from the BC Community Forest Association, will be a real resource to us. But she also indicated there's a specialty legal firm that's done a lot of work with community forests that also recognizes that and can do some of that work. But the model of the Chinook Community Forest, which was the second community forest issued to Burns Lake, if you remember, the Babine Forest Products Mill burnt down. Hampton wanted to rebuild. They wanted some guaranteed volume, all of that noise. That created the Chinook Community Forest, very large community forest involving both the Lakes Regional District, the village of Burns Lake, and multiple, I think 6 bands up there. So we're looking at that structure. It's a pre-existing structure. What happens with most community forests is you're going to end up, and we're talking about it even with the preliminary step, where you'll probably end up with a steering group or, a visioning group or something that will involve the political leadership, and then a technical working group that's actually going to do the work and bring it back to your steering group. A lot of community forests actually end up structuring that way longer term. So you'll have your formal board, most likely everybody with a single share if it's a limited company, all with equal voting rights, but it's going to be run and managed on a day-to-day basis by a technical group that's running it, right? So you may have a biannual meeting or something. So those are the structures that we're looking at. But Chinook gives us a structure that's similar to kind of who the players are that we have involved with this. And there's a legal firm out there that apparently is quite familiar with structuring these things.
That's great. I'll have a chance to look at the Chinook Community Forest then. And I just wanted to make the comment about the opportunity for a non-renewable license to actually harvest some of the timber that is available. That's a very eloquent solution to the potential of a $500,000 bill for 2 years' worth of work to get it up and running. So it allows me to breathe a little easier as one of the shareholders potential for this community forest that we're not going to be struggling trying to find the monies to get us off the ground. So that's a good thing. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And the city manager and I have been clear, and will clarify even at our next meeting, because right now, most of the First Nations in particular don't have resources to advance this. They're already tapped out, whether it's through referrals or their own new licenses. Some of them are in between band managers and natural resource managers. The CRD certainly doesn't have the ability to come in. So because we have forestry staff available, we've indicated that in the early stages, we'll act as a coordination facilitation just to bring the group together. But the minute we start moving into actually managing, whether it's a NERFL or contractors, et cetera, we're going to be working with them to make sure those become billable hours, because we need to compensate that. And at the meeting, that notice of if we're all just doing the collaboration and staff are being used to collaborate to get us up and running, that everybody's going to comp that. The minute one of the partners is picking up work associated with getting us up and going, we'll have set up an accounting system to be able to make sure that that partner's made whole at the end. So while it may be nervous-making that we may have to do some upfront things, I think we'll quickly, probably an MOU at the very first meeting, to clarify that point, that all partners will be made whole in actual expenditures, okay? Okay, thank you. That's the update. And again, we'll keep you posted. Hopefully we do meet in early August and keep the momentum on this. Okay, so finally on to staff reports. Director.
Oh, Mayor, we're missing the UBCM executive
Oh,
nomination.
my mistake. Thank you. I've got it penciled in here. My mistake. So UBCM, I always bug Councillor Roodenburg about this, but in all seriousness, I call for nominations for UBCM executive. We have one of our own who is interested and needs to be nominated, and the nomination is for vice.
First vice.
First vice, okay. Councillor Elliott, so moved. Councillor Runge, second. Questions or comments? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. And Councillor Roodenburg is claiming we get no graft, no moose sausage, no nothing because of COVID. I think that's just wrong.
And I would never want it on record that I'm bribing you guys, but it will be available at a later point.
Post-COVID, it better be double the amount that we normally get. Okay. So Director Turner, on to city staff reports.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, this development variance permit is to review the variance for a requirement that a carriage house at 2060 Hendry Road be required to be on community sewer. The applicant is intending to convert the second floor of an existing barn to a residential unit, thus creating a carriage house by definition. The property is currently serviced by community water, but not by community sewer, and instead by an on-site lagoon. What's important here is we have been in touch with Northern Health. They have reviewed the site and have given approval that the site is sufficient to, the lagoon is sufficient to service these both residences. In addition, the applicant has requested the variance for the following reasons. They are stating that they are going to utilize the variance to provide temporary housing to out-of-town workers. They find this will be a benefit to the community. They also state that it will be a low impact to surrounding residences as the barn is well back from the view of other properties. In terms of the zoning bylaw analysis, the plans do meet all other zoning bylaw requirements, and staff have no concerns in any other way regarding the planning on this. As such, staff is recommending that council approve DVP 2060-62 to vary sections 420.6D and 9.2J of the zoning bylaw, number 1880, 2019, to permit a barn to be converted to a carriage house on Lot 1, District Lot 6682, Cariboo District Plan 31935, except plans PGP 38008, PGP 39475, and PGP 4446, and EPP 7972, or otherwise at 2060 Hendry Road, which is not connected to community sewer system.
Councillor Roodenburg, so moved. Councillor Elliott, second. Any questions or comments? Councillor Roodenburg?
Could you repeat those numbers
No,
again?
not going to happen. Okay. Councillor Elliott?
Thank you, and thank you for the report. I think this is exciting, the direction that we're moving in, and I think we're going to have to consider being a little bit fluid on some of these things, as it's going to be new ground for all of us.
Thank you. And the requirement to review community sewer water and sewer when they're not community is important to keep in, and we should review them on a case-by-case basis because they are different on each lot.
Well, and I can tell you from multiple conversations in the CRD, we definitely want to have it the way we've got it, because at the Cariboo Regional District, some of the biggest issues you've got are additions to properties that don't have sufficient water or sewer capabilities. So I think having it come every time like this is the right thing to do. Councillor Runge.
Thank you. So my question actually comes under the other point on page 3 of 4, page 30 of 106, with a new civic address being assigned after the permit is approved. Is that?
That's always the case, Councillor.
That's always the case? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and maybe, Director Turner, you could just explain why.
The reason why we do this, with that civic addressing requirements, is to make sure that appropriate civic addresses are applied to different properties. Yeah, this is constantly the way we do it. Even for a residential property, you'll see doesn't have a civic address, except for a few occasions where it's been accidentally and has not been removed yet. It's to indicate, A, there's a vacancy, and to ensure that there's new civic addressing rules, and we want to make sure that we're going to the right rules as we proceed along.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Okay. So on the motion, all those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Okay. And we're going to have our chief building official come up for the remedial action order.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The purpose of this report is to provide information regarding the condition of the structure at the property of 1207 Crane Ave, which was considered to constitute an unsafe condition, health and safety concern, and a nuisance, and to bring forward to Council consideration a resolution for remedial action requirement against the owner of the property, which will act to motivate action to eliminate the unsafe condition and nuisance property. The vacant structure located at Civic 1207 Crane Ave has been continually deteriorating since 2003, with no action from the property owner to remediate. Bylaw enforcement staff are receiving complaints from neighboring property owners that youth have been accessing the vacant building, which is in an extremely dangerous state. There have been bylaw complaints on the property as far back as 2013. Chief building official inspected the site on June 18th, 2020, and determined the site was a hazard and danger to the public and must be immediately demolished. The structure creates an unsafe condition with the meaning of Section 73(2)A of the Community Charter. The property is a nuisance within the meaning of Section 74(1)A of the Community Charter. It's the recommendation that Council consider the principal building located at PID 016-132-238, Lot 11, Block 2, District Lot 1229, Cariboo District Plan 5809, Civic 1207 Crane Ave, known as the property, is in a state that creates an unsafe condition as per Section 73 of the Community Charter, and that Council declares the property unclean as to be offensive to the community and as such are nuisance to the community as per Section 74 of the Community Charter, and that Council requires the listed property owner to demolish the principal building by July, and I might bring that up that we have made a couple of typos in there from 2019 instead of 2020. July 22nd, 2020, due to the health and safety conditions identified by the chief building official and bylaw supervisor. And that council invokes the right to have a shorter time period that the property owner has to provide request for reconsideration by July 15th, 2020, as per Section 79 of the Community Charter, and the 30 days to demolish as per Section 79 of the Community Charter due to the hazardous conditions and the safety of the community at large. And that council authorizes staff to have the building demolished and dispose of all materials should the interested parties fail to demolish it within the time frame given, with the full costs of such demolition and disposal of materials be added to the property taxes of the property. Statutory requirements pursuant to Section 73(2)A of the Community Charter, council may consider a building or other structure to be in or create an unsafe condition. Pursuant to Section 74(1)A of the Community Charter, council may declare a building or structure to be a nuisance. In addition to and independent of Section 74(1)A, council may, pursuant to Section 74(2)A of the Community Charter, declare as a nuisance a thing that council considers so dilapidated or unclean as to be offensive to the community. Pursuant to Section 79 of the Community Charter, council has the option to shorten both the 14-day notice for the owner to submit reconsideration of the remediation action requirement and the 30 days to complete the work under Section 17 of the Community Charter. Pursuant to Section 17 of the Community Charter, after service of the RAR or remediation action requirement, the owner has 30 days to complete the required works. If not completed by this time, this section gives authority to the city and or agent to enter onto the property to carry out the required remedial work. Pursuant to Section 17 and 258 of the Community Charter, any expenses incurred by the city in undertaking the work may be collected as both debt or unpaid taxes. If the owner does not comply with the RAR order, the city will undertake the works as per resolution and Section 17 and 258 of the Community Charter, and the cost will be placed as a debt or taxes for the property. If the taxes are not paid on the property and remain unpaid, the property will be put up for tax sale. If there is no sale, the property will be reverted to the city. We're estimating the cost at approximately $40,000 based on past demolitions that we've undertaken. But we are trying to get quotes right now because there is some mold removal and stuff before they can actually go in there and start demoing. And the background stuff is just basic stuff.
Great. Thank you, Kim. So Councillor Elliott moves the recommendation. Councillor Paul, second. Just for, full clarification, just in terms of the record, the report dates also were 2019. I think the drafter of the report was just a year behind at that time. So the report dates are also the 2020, as well as the recommendation dates are 2020. And any further comments or questions? Councillor Runge.
Yes, thank you. My question actually is with regards to the 14 and the 30-day notice. Is there any way to keep these buildings safe, just blocking them off? Because I'm just, given COVID, given the timeline of getting someone, is that a realistic timeline, even to have someone take it down in those 7 days, 8 days? Or has this been going, there's a little background I think that I'm missing here. And then the second question that I have is with regards to, if a property owner owns more than one property in town, can we legally put a lien on a different property? Thank you.
So as to your first question, those timelines are already reduced from what's a typical timeline. So we're asking that it be faster than the normal timeline from the Community Charter. That's as fast as we can do it. Could somebody take that house down in 7 days? Absolutely. No problem. As to your second question, I'm not a lawyer, so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think for all of council's edification, real property is real property, and we deal with the specific name property. That's why you get all of the numbers, so you can't shift all around. Our only ability is to deal with that named piece of property, okay? I think questions or comments? Councillor Elliott, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Kevin, for your work on this. I mean, this is just really disturbing to look at this, and I can't imagine it being across the road from me or having fear that my kids are going in there. One of the comments in here is that it's offensive to the community. It absolutely is. It's a danger, so thanks for doing this. I hope the community understands that we're working as fast as we can. We've got you on board now to try and clean some of these places up. So good work, and let's keep it going.
Okay, Councillor Paul.
Thank you, and thank you, Kevin. Been around for a while, seen a lot of unsightly and unsafe premises. I would say that this one is absolutely the worst that I've ever seen.
I'd agree.
Okay. Just a note for council from a finance committee perspective. Going into the 2021 budget, we have tagged these demolitions for some consideration by council, whether council will need to establish a reserve or whether we want to take a look at the work we're doing on on our lands relative to this, because the likelihood of this being accruing as a cost to the city, we're going to have to bear it up front, but the fact that somebody's going to have to pay taxes and arrears plus $40,000 in order to acquire what will become a vacant lot is not likely. So the likelihood is, and it's happened in the past, this will become a piece of property the city will acquire, and therefore the cost will be a real cost to taxpayers to demolition this. So we will be bringing something forward from the Finance Committee as part of our 2021 budget and beyond to talk about how we want to finance this and at least have either a reserve or build into our annual budget some form of demolitions, because we've got a lot of these that we're going to have to be dealing with over the next little while. So that's just a heads up for council. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just further to that, and I think further to Councillor Runge's question, I mean, $40,000, as you mentioned, $40,000 is, we're not going to be able to recoup that in a sale of that land. It's just not possible, I don't think. So is there not another way that we can go about this and attempt to sue this individual or another individual down the road? This is our only option. Thank you.
Yeah, so just for the edification, especially since we're webcasting, we're getting a lot of head nodding. So maybe Director Turner, you may need to come up to the mic and just give some edification to council and to the public about this.
Thank you. One point as well I wanted to make, just to be fair, we did advise the property owner of the insecurities on the property, and they did arrange for people to go there and put more security there so the use could not access the property again. So they did try and step up to the plate somewhat on that end. They do recognize that we are taking this move and that we will be proceeding here. The aspect of it, the ability for someone to demolish a house like that is very significant, $40,000. So for them to be able to do that and not, it was just financially not feasible for them. And I believe that we are going to see more of these. This is what we've seen on many properties. We're going to continue to see that. And that's unfortunately where we have to weigh the aspect of taking on that financial burden as a community, or having the community repercussions of having a facility like this or a building like this that is becoming a problem, a nuisance for the neighborhood, and in fact, a horrible hazard in this case.
But let's address the question of litigation or other real assets that this particular owner may have, a lien against those assets. What are the circumstances that, prevent us from doing that as a municipality?
community charter and the Local Government Act are what provides us with an ability to do whatever actions that we have. And it very clearly states out what actions that we have available to us, and that is what we are proceeding with. There's nothing beyond that. I don't even know what the case would be for that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, because the bottom line is we can choose not to demolish and choose not to incur the costs. That's the bottom line, right? And we can just continue to go after the landowner to deal with it. So we're voluntarily deciding in the public interest that we're going to incur the cost to expedite getting it done. And we have a tool, it's called putting it onto their property taxes. The issue, of course, as I've already indicated, is the likelihood of them paying is not there, so we'll inherit it, so therefore we inherit the cost. But because we're voluntarily taking that cost on, we can't go to a judge and say, oh yeah, but that person should pay for it, right? The judge would probably say, you shouldn't have done it if you didn't want to incur the expense. Kevin, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that we're moving forward and hopefully trying to catch these places earlier than this, because this just went on too long, and once it becomes derelict and it starts to deteriorate, it's all downhill from there. So hopefully moving forward, we're trying to catch these places earlier so that we don't end up with or occur with this cost of demolition, right?
Yeah, and our maintenance bylaw gives us the tool to get in earlier, but we've got a lot of catch-up in the community. So, Councillor Runge, you had your hand up?
Yes, thank you. And Kevin, thank you. It's just, my point was because I'm really scared of opening up a can of worms, and there's a landowner with multiple properties saying, hey, I don't have to take care of these when they hit that point. So I'm glad to hear that we're going at them much earlier so they actually have value to the landowner prior to this. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I believe we voted this. We haven't voted this? Okay, so on the recommendation, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you both. City Manager, on the 2019 annual report. No, you can't read the entire annual report for council. I know as much as you would like to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And there's so many pictures in this that even reading it, it will not take more than about an hour. So it'll be awesome. I'd just like to say a couple of comments to start with. We have received no public submissions on this. The annual report, as I'm sure council will remember from this same exciting report last time, gets published in the paper and advertised that we're doing an annual report, and it gives the public a chance to have some input into this report. So all those requirements under the Community Charter, Section 98, of advertising and completing the report have all been done and as appropriately. And as well, this annual report is being done at least 14 days after it's been available for public inspection. So there's quite a few rules around that, and those have all been followed. And as of 4:30 this afternoon, there were no public comments received. I would just like to state, though, on the actual report itself, I think this was, if council has had a chance to review it, I think you would agree that this is one of the best, or maybe the best annual report that we've done so far. And I think some of the changes with it are that it's more visual and it's less wordy. So the Communications Department, thanks very much to them. First Tian before she left us on leave, and then Laura, who's taken over, really did a great job in paring down some of the verbiage and really capturing, I think, the essence of what the city is doing in the photographic evidence of it, and just small descriptions of what we're doing. Council, of course, has already seen much of this. The strategic plan for this year and also for last year has already been approved by council. The financial statements already approved by council. Permissive exemptions already approved by council. So what this report really does is it kind of puts it all together in one nice, neat package. So I'm not going to go through the report. However, one section that I would like to mention that I believe we started it last year but continued this year, and it's kind of one of the more interesting sections to me, is the infographic sheet on 2019 city stats, and it's on page 56 of 106 of your paper agendas. And it's got some really interesting stats in there that are just quick facts, and I think I like these infographics so much, and I think it says so much to the public that we'll continue to look at expanding these and making them even more eye-catching, right? There's some really good ones in here. So other than that, I'm not going to spend any time. I'm happy to answer any questions that council would have on this, but as I said, you've seen most of this information before, so I am looking for a resolution, let me just check, that council approves the 2019 annual report for the city of Quesnel.
Can I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Runge, Councillor Roodenburg, questions or comments? Okay, everybody's had lots of opportunity with this, and this is just the formal adoption of the report. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you, City Manager. Okay, next up, with respect to our follow-up of our last meeting, and so again, for those who watched our last meeting, we had a delegation with respect to what we refer to as the Elliott Street Supportive Housing, and will be named the Bridges Supportive Housing. And Director Turner was asked to come back just to give us an update on the community engagement side and the various agreements that we've got. So, Director Turner.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, as you stated, the new supportive housing facility is scheduled to open soon. It'll open, proposed in late August, early September. Council met with BC Housing and the Quesnel Shelter and Support Society on June 23rd to receive an update on the processes and agreements in place, and that information was a public council meeting. However, at that meeting, it was requested that council be provided with the housing agreement and the good neighbor agreements that are in place, as some council members were not on council during the formation of these agreements. In 2018, when final development approvals were considered for the development of the housing facility on Elliott Street, council required that BC Housing enter into a housing agreement with the city to identify some conditions for the development. These conditions included specifications around use of the property and requiring that BC Housing ensure the operator of the facility enter into a good neighbor agreement with the city. I provided just a few terms from each of these agreements that will help you get some context of what the agreements are about. The relevant clauses in the housing agreement, specifically with respect to the good neighbor agreement, the good neighbor agreement by definition means an agreement entered into by the operator, city, and any other parties mutually agreed to by the city and the operator, that defines a process that is open to the public and proactively and reactively address neighborhood and community concerns. A provision in the agreement is the requirement that the operator develop and enter into that good neighbor agreement with the city and other stakeholders to be mutually agreed upon by the operator and the city prior to the operation of the facility, and maintain a process for ensuring the goals and objectives of the agreement are met. BC Housing confirmed that this agreement is in place, and they agreed that this would be a agreement that will help the development process maintain a good position within the community. The housing agreement is a bylaw and is also registered on the title of the property. The good neighbor agreement is the schedule of the housing agreement. The agreement specifies that the operator will ensure the committee leads an open public process that is held monthly beginning prior to occupation of the facility. The Quesnel Shelter and Support Society, following our meeting, sent out invites to a meeting to be held on July 22nd, 2020 from 1 to 3 p.m. The invitation is attached for council's information and the public's information. Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be a teleconference. You must visit their website to register for being on this conference call. The website also provides more information on the facility. The events page helps you register for the meeting, and there is a contact page that you can provide comments and concerns to be addressed at this meeting. The council also recommended to QSS on the June 23rd council meeting that they canvass the neighborhood around the new facility to identify neighborhood concerns and inform the neighborhood of this good neighbor agreement process, of which the residents can be a part. And we've sent those requests to the Shelter Support Society and BC Housing as well. So there's no recommendation.
Yeah, thank you. So we did have a meeting of the Public Safety and Policing Committee post the council meeting last. just to talk about any outcomes from the council meeting with BC Housing and with the Quesnel Shelter Society. As Director Turner has indicated, you know, that desire expressed by council for door-to-door canvassing prior to opening, and but the Public Safety and Policing Committee also wanted to have some guarantees around when the Good Neighbor group would meet, or when there would be an availability for people to give feedback through the Good Neighbor agreement. And we talked about, we think that at least for the first 6 months or so, it should be monthly. There should be something formal where there's feedback sought, there's an engagement process, and then that could go to bi-monthly for the, you know, the first year, 18 months or whatever, so that there is that regular opportunity for people to give feedback. And then the other piece was a meeting with BC Housing, Quesnel Shelter Society, and one of our standing committees, most likely ECOM, to start the discussion of the shelter, Seasons House future immediately after the opening of the new facility, and we get a sense of the client base of the new facility relative to the shelter. And so I would invite council to more formally make that request of both the Quesnel Shelter Society and BC Housing. So the 3 points that we would like to see as a council: the door-to-door canvassing undertaken by the Shelter Society prior to or immediately after the opening of the bridges. Our preference is prior to, so there's no surprises. The second, that the Good Neighbor agreement feedback opportunities are monthly for at least the first 6 months of the operating of bridges. And thirdly, that a meeting be established as soon as possible after the opening of bridges between one of our standing committees, the Shelter Society and BC Housing, to discuss, immediately begin the discussion of the future of Seasons House. So I'd invite a resolution to that effect. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Goulet, second. Questions or comments? Councillor Goulet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And actually, in the Good Neighbor Agreement, it does specify that they were to have monthly meetings and a 6-month report, and that was signed in 2018, and here we are in 2020. So we need to have those monthly meetings and continue to do that and push that we have some monthly meetings. I think it's quite specific in the Good Neighbor Agreement that was signed that those would be something that would have to be done automatically. But asking and reassuring that we have those meetings, I think, is great for the council moving forward.
Thank you. Director Turner?
Yeah, the Good Neighbor Agreement does specify monthly for 6 months at a minimum, for 6 months at a minimum, to then be decided by the group following that, what the time period would be, as the mayor stated. And the reporting would be back into the committee from the Shelter and Support Society on any other complaints that they're receiving.
Okay. And I think I can speak on behalf of council. Our hope is that the Bridges supportive housing is a real value added to our community and to the vulnerable population in our community. None of us, you know, feel ill will towards this. We just also, as we pointed out last week, have an obligation to the greater public safety in our community, and we've got some concerns that we don't want Bridges to go down the path that Shelter went down in terms of shifting gears on what they were offering, the kind of client group that they had there, and some of the spillover that we had into the immediate area and into the downtown core. So that's what we're trying to prevent. I think as a council, we're also excited to see the other supportive housing project on Front Street advanced as well. And then from our community's perspective, we're going to have over 70, I think it's 72 units, all in, of 24 supportive housing for this vulnerable population. That's a very large number on a per capita basis relative to many other communities. So we're not stopping the conversations we're having with BC Housing. We're not stopping advancing, getting supportive housing built. We also have to, at the same time, make sure that we're protecting the public interest writ large and public safety writ large, and that's one of our jobs as a council. So that's what we're doing. Councillor Roodenburg.
Thank you, and I know that I spoke to a few members of our community who listened to our meeting last week, and were really appreciative of the tone that we had with both the Housing Society and BC Housing. The fact that, the questions were straight up and honest questions, and that they appreciate how we're moving forward, and that the information is coming out, and that the questions that we ask are ones that the community have been wondering themselves. So they were appreciative of that meeting last week.
Councillor Paul?
Thank you. I don't think it's any secret that that Seasons House never really turned out the way that it was thought or the way that it was intended. At least that's my view. But I think one good thing that is coming out of that is that there's been a pile of good advance work that has gone into the Elliott Street supportive housing project. And if it were not for Seasoned House, a lot of that stuff may have slipped through the cracks. So I think that there's a positive coming out of this.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think the one thing that we all need to check ourselves with too, though, and I'm not disputing the operations of Seasons House and what people's expectations were, but I think the circumstances worldwide and province-wide have also shifted quite substantially. And with the opioid crisis, more and more people homeless, more and more people at risk of homelessness, I think there are mitigating factors there, notwithstanding some of the issues that we've had with how the shelter has been run. So I think there's been a bit of a shift there too. So, okay, with that in mind, and again, because I've got real bodies and here I'm a little bit distracted, did we vote the motion? We haven't voted the motion. That's why we have Gina here. It's always good to be kept on task. Okay, so on the motion, which is just to ask the Quesnel Shelter Society and BC Housing to take these steps with respect to public engagement and then meet with us with respect to the Seasons House future. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, we have one item of correspondence, and it's mostly there just for council's edification. It's from the Quesnel and District Daycare Society and noting their search for a new location. And of course, as council is aware, we are working with the provincial government. We worked with Spark to take a look at our daycare needs. It would be tough for us while we're looking at building a new daycare because there's more needs out there than spaces to lose one of our longest standing ones. So it's more just a notification to council that there's an at-risk situation here. And this will be taken into consideration as our economic development folks take a look at the daycare possibility through the provincial funding. Okay, so moving on then to no changes to upcoming meeting schedule. Just keep apprised, as council members should know, we do tag certain meeting dates as needed during the summer months. And that's just in the event that there's a time-sensitive issue or something that we need to deal with. And so it's not an intention to meet at those times other than the regular one. But if there is an as-needed one, then do that. And then do please let Ms. Albers in particular and myself know of any time that you are not available because we are also still in flood season and potentially entering fire season as well, depending on how things go. So, but as of yet, there's no changes to meeting schedule. No changes to committee appointments. Announcements, future events. Councillor Runge and then Councillor Roodenburg.
Thank you very much, and you guys know that's not normally me that does this. So with the indulgence of council, and on behalf of our absent councillor Vic, I was asked to parlay this message, and it's one of those things that happens, every 100 years. So I think, normally we don't celebrate birthdays, but 100-year birthdays. I just thought I'll do this. This July 14th, William Charles Benningfield, he's a resident of Quesnel since 2007. It will celebrate his 100th birthday. So right here in Quesnel, he's a Second World War veteran, fought with the Middlesex Regiment with the British Army during the Battle of Hong Kong, and after the war in 1948, William and his wife Emily emigrated to Canada. As it happens, they will also celebrate their 72nd wedding anniversary in July. They have 5 children, 8 grandchildren, have many great-grandchildren, and I just want to, please join me wishing William the happiest birthday on the 14th of this month, and we thank him for his service to Canada and the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Roodenburg.
Thank you. I had the honor of representing council on Saturday night at the Quesnel Ambassador Leadership Program, and it it truly was a unique event. Despite COVID and whatever, the coordinators rocked the whole program and made everybody feel quite comfortable there. So just another big thank you to the outgoing ambassadors. And in case you haven't heard, our new ambassador team is Sarah Footet, Beth Mattioli, and Jadacia Barker. So look forward to those three young ladies representing Quesnel for the next year.
Great, thank you. And I think, Ms. Albers, we're looking at potentially our August 25th meeting to see if we can accommodate having the outgoing and incoming ambassadors come and meet with us as a council. So thank you for your attendance at that. Any other announcements, future events? Just one thing for council and to note, today at 4:30, the bid process closed for CNC Wood Products. So that was a 1 week, as I sent a note out to council, it was a 1 week delay for those who wanted to put a bid in with intention to operate. The PricewaterhouseCoopers, the trustee, will now make a determination based on the liquidator bids, which were in 10 days ago, and then the operator bids. And it's my understanding that there will be a couple of operator bids, if not a couple more. They did get serious towards the end. I've been back and forth with a number of these folks and with PricewaterhouseCoopers. We depending on what happens, we did hit a bit of a glitch with Bill 22. So Bill 22 is the bill that was introduced by the NDP government to give communities and First Nations input into license transfers. It's only been used twice so far, one up in Fort St. James with a transfer of a license from one company to another, and one over in the Valemount area, Clearwater area, with respect to another license transfer. Because CNC Wood Products does hold a non-replaceable for its license, there will potentially be a Bill 22 review. It was quite a bit of dialogue back and forth to understand how that would work, because it's only for about 67,000 cubic meters. And to whether or not, it became a bit of an issue, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because if you're going to liquidate the asset, then that license is a cash asset that you put a value to and go to cash with, because you're not intending to operate the mill. Versus if you intend to operate the mill, that is just simply food to run that mill. The logs are just feeding the mill. So how do you do a cash valuation when you're comparing a liquidator's cash a valuation of the mill to an operator's cash valuation? It becomes a bit of a potential disparity. So we went back and forth, a fair bit on what's going to happen with that. I think the indication I was given, there was some kind of workaround so that PricewaterhouseCoopers can take the license valuation into account in determining the best outcome from this. But either way, we as a council will be engaged in the Bill 22 review, and I've spoken with all of the First Nations about that review, as well as the Cariboo Regional District, because if we do get a potential owner-operator, we'll want that review expedited. We don't want any further delays. We'd like to get this mill up and running, get these employees back to work, and in particular, get CNC Wood Products feeding into the market that they feed into, so they don't lose any of that market share. So I'll keep you apprised of that. I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take them to evaluate. I've been told we should know hopefully by the end of the week. Okay. On that note, I don't have anything else. Gallery questions? Seeing no gallery questions, I'd invite a motion to adjourn. Councillor Runge, so moved. Councillor Roodenburg, second. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, and thank you, staff, for enabling a COVID real-time meeting.